What is the most horrific thing that someone has told you super casually? Guy I worked with said that in the late 80s he lived with 5 other guys in an apartment in New York. Sometime after the HIV test is developed, all of the roommates agree to get tested. Apparently the results were mailed to them. Basically, one guy got the mail and opened everyone's test. In so doing he finds out one of the roommates has HIV. He shows the test results to every roommate except the guy who is HIV positive. Then they destroy the test results. They all pack their stuff and abandon apartment and the HIV positive guy. None of them ever spoke to the HIV positive roommate again. They never told him his test results. The guy I worked with laughed so hard telling me this story. It's faked up. The guy I worked with had no remorse or a second of compassion even 30 years later, and knowing the HIV positive roommate probably died. Who knows how many people the unknowing HIV positive guy may have unknowingly transmitted HIV to before he had serious symptoms. JP, if you're reading this, fuck you. Heartless bastard. When I was in college, there was this guy who would hang around me sometimes that seemed just a little bit off. But he was nice, and we both had similar interest, so we hung out. One day, after I hadn't seen him for weeks, he tells me it's because the police were interviewing him. He tells me this story. Him and his 2 friends were in the woods, shooting a .22 pistol. Friend #3 tries to fire, and it doesn't go off. Friend #3 looks into the barrel to check the gun. The gun then goes off, firing the round in there, and then the next round, shooting him twice in the face. You read that correctly. 3 guys went into the woods with a .22 pistol, 2 walked out, and the 3rd was shot twice in the face and died. Anyone who knows anything about guns knows this is basically impossible. But since Guy and friend #2 both had the same story, and the cops had no way to prove otherwise, no charges were filed. I stopped hanging out with that guy. Forever. My mom was in the ER in September 2019. She had stage 4th colon cancer and was in a lot of pain and other stuff. The doctor came in and just basically said, well, you have some heart failure and your liver is failing, and just walked out. What the fuck? My mom died 14 hours later from septic shock that they did not tell us, but had it wrote down in her chart. Ugh. Makes me so angry writing it. Edit. Wow, I had no idea this would get that much attention. Y'all are more sympathetic than my therapist. Thank you to whomever gained the award. I don't know what it means, but thanks. Edit 2. My mom was actually getting treatment in Houston in July 2019. She had sepsis then, and her oncologist told her to call all family and friends in as if something happened, it would happen quick. Her sister was the only one with her then, and the rest of the family was 8 hours away. We hauled us there, and her doctor was shocked that she was okay. We met with him after she got out of hospital there, and he said there is nothing else we can do but go to your local hospital and they might have something, or we recommend you go on hospice. We were crying hysterically, and the doctor had to actually walk out of the room because he started crying. So, we came home, and she met with local oncologist 2 hours away. He was rude and didn't understand why she was trying to get treatment close to home. She was supposed to have blood work done every week, I think. The day before she passed away, she went to her primary doctor and was 5 or so minutes late, and they cancelled her spot without calling. Apparently they don't realize PPL with cancer get weaker and weaker and are going slower than normal. Not that having that appointment would have changed the outcome, but holy shit. We could've had a warning or something. When she was at the local the doctor said she needed to be transported to a better hospital for PPL in her condition. This was at 8 AM. She didn't get transferred until 3:30 PM to a hospital that was 3 hours away. When my aunt and I got there, she wasn't responsive. She was at local I had to call my dad and younger brother and tell them she wasn't going to make it. That was the hardest thing I have ever done. Life has been a fucking disaster since she died, as she was the glue that literally kept everything together and everybody getting along. I have been so depressed and angry since everything. Sorry if this is all over the place. Thanks for reading. If you join the military, there's always be that one guy/girl in your squad or platoon, the soldier who's about as bright as a bag of hammers and or you'll swear their parents must be cousins or something. In my previous unit, that soldier also happened to be something of a Christian zealot with some really faked up ideas about how the world should be. And I wish it was just as simple as thinking the earth is only 6,000 years old. That soldier was straight up faking delusional. So what did they say during the deployment that was so scary? Killing Iraqis isn't a sin because they aren't Christians. Dear Department of Defense, please for the love of fuck start administering psych evils at MEPS. People like this do not need to be given loaded firearms and uniforms. Editing to clarify, this was not some broken old SFC with years worth of PTSD from past deployments. This was a 20-year-old private from suburban Georgia. I usually work with kids in facilities. We had a boy come in, about 10 years old. They had him on a 72-hour hold because he threatened to kill a classmate at school. We got those often, and most times it was just a kid being a kid and ends up being caught, and we are forced to treat it as real. No big deal. Well, it actually was a huge deal. He would keep fidgeting in his chair and on the ground. I'd always say, Tom, try to keep still, okay? Or Tom, if you are getting restless you can walk around the table if that helps. At lunch I was asking him how he was doing, and he said it's weird to sleep all by myself. Some families bed share with siblings, so this wasn't way out of line. I said, oh, do you sleep in bed with your sister? And then he dropped this on me. No, daddy likes to sleep in my bed, but I don't like it, because it always hurts my bottom. Now I'm like, fuck in my head. They tell you to not express emotion if the kid isn't so as coolly as I could. I said, oh, why is that? And he told me all about how daddy playing a poking tickle game, but he can't show me what it is because he's not allowed to tell anyone. Guys, I wanted to cry. We ended up having to take him to the emergency room for an anal exam, which confirmed his dad had been anally wrapping him for so long that he couldn't remember a time it didn't happen. That's only one of many horrible stories I have from that job. And now I need a drink. Just remembering it makes me feel sick and shaky with anger. I hope his dad is slowly tortured for the rest of his life. Oh, I accidentally did this recently. I was telling my boyfriend about how this girl I knew stalked me in October/November of last year. I hardly knew her, but she sent me some really aggressive and threatening messages and would get really angry if I didn't answer her immediately. She actually non-consensually kissed a friend of mine and harassed another. After a few days of this, I cut contact with her and blocked her. After telling my boyfriend all this, he said something like, well, if she tries anything like that again, you could beat her up. And I just said, oh, no need to worry about that. She's dead now. Obviously complete shock on his face. I really should have led up to that better. Basically I found out she had passed away in February for completely unrelated reasons. It really shook me up for a few days, but like I said, I didn't really know her. Of course, saying it the way I did was pretty callous of me. I was out to dinner with my ex-wife, two of her female friends, and my uncle with his wife. We were just sitting around the table at a casual restaurant eating the appetizer that just arrived. While I'm gnawing on a chicken tender, my uncle asked one of the girls if they were married, and the first girl drops a bomb. Uncle, are you married? Girl, yeah, but my husband killed himself. Whole table, what? AWW? When? How? Girl, yeah. He called my cell phone and then hung himself in his closet and recorded the whole thing. That was 2 weeks ago, I think. Whole table, oh my god. Girl, it's not a big deal. He was mad that I got more girls than him. Mind you, this girl worked every day with my wife and no one knew. We were all in our 20s, in the military, and hung out. Her husband was in a different branch, and was led to believe he was deployed. We knew that she was bi, and they had an open relationship, but had no clue anything had happened. The girl was pretty messed up when dealing with emotion even before this. Edit, spelling. May not super fit 100%, but it was pretty horrifying for me. The first psychiatrist I went to after being horribly depressed for years, after I left the Navy. After I finished unloading a huge part of why I was so miserable, the first thing she said was, that's depressing. Shrugged and poured her third Coke of the session, all in 20 minutes, into her big gulp cup. The next thing she says is, oh, by the way, you don't qualify for being seen here, but we can still finish the session if you want. When I visually got upset at this whole situation, she said I could come back a couple more times in the meantime till I found a different place to go. As you can probably guess, I didn't finish the session and I never went back. Just the callousness and disregard for other people's mental state while calling yourself a psychiatrist was and is disgusting. Side note, in the 20-minute session she also offhandedly mentioned how she was scamming the government. She lived in the area by the office, but she was taking just one online class at some school in San Fran because the cost of living is higher there, so the post 9/11 GI Bill will give me more money. That bill gives you money for rent and food. You get the same amount, even if you only take one class. During grad school, a couple classmates and I had been to visit a professor on the second to top floor of our building. When we were leaving, we got in the elevator, and there was already a middle-aged gentleman in the elevator. The three of us joined him on the ride down. As often happens in elevators, we were all silent while we rode downward. Just before the doors opened, the guy out of nowhere asks, "Do any of you know what a snipod is?" We all exchanged looks, and one of us said no. The guy shrugged and got off the elevator on the ground floor, and we continued to the first basement. It was one of those buildings where the front exit was on one level and the rear exit was on a different level. It was odd, but he seemed pretty normal and good-natured. As we walked to our cars, we were halfway across the parking lot when I pulled out my phone and googled it. Turns out snipod means sniper tripod, as in the thing a sniper would use to mount his sniper firearm of choice. I announced this to my two classmates and we all kinda pondered in silence for a moment, until one pointed out that we had been on the second to top floor, and the guy was already in the elevator going downward, meaning he had been on the top floor, or the roof. December 28, 2018, I received a phone call from my father's surgeon at about 3 AM. Went something like this. "Is this my name?" "It is." "This is Dr. Zism calling in regards to your father. Does he have any other children or a wife?" "No wife but 2 other children. Can you get them here?" "I think so. Why do you ask?" "Well, Hes not doing so well, and I don't think Hes going to make it. My father had an allergic reaction to a blood thinner they used during one of his surgeries. This had caused clotting in the surgery area, which led to portions of his intestines to start to go necrotic within his body and leak intestinal fluid. This is known as sepsis and is highly deadly, 40-60% mortality rate. Dad lived, took 5 more life-saving surgeries and 3 months in the hospital, but has still here breaking my balls on a daily basis. Late to the party as per usual. TLDR. Officer came to my house while home alone and told me dead-eyed that my father had killed himself and then drove off. When I was 5 I was home alone and I just felt like something was wrong that day. I couldn't put my finger on it, but later that day my mom said she had to go to town for some groceries and would be right back. Please don't leave or freak out. Well, about 15 minutes after, an officer showed up to the front door and knocked. He kinda seemed distant when I remember him. Anyways, he asked me if my mom was home, and I said no, she went to town. I should mention we lived in a rural area. This was common. The officer then just looked at me straight in the eyes and paused for maybe a second and just said, "Your father shot himself under a bridge a few miles away. Here's my card. Give it to your mother when she gets back and have her call me. Good luck, kid." He then turned around and got in his Crown Vic and drove off without another word. I zoned out. I couldn't remember the next 3 days. All I try. Really faked me up, man. Edit for context. Yes, that was irresponsible of my mom, and I'm not defending her. She did some faked up stuff growing up. I found out when I was 21 that my mom was the one behind him killing himself. She would call and yell at him and refuse to let him see me. She was married to him and they were separated. She was addicted to Xanax at the time, and so she would be passed out for hours and hours at a time. So I guess that's why she felt okay with doing that. But yeah, she still has a note from him I've never seen. She feels too guilty about it. Family has a cabin. It's at the very end of this long logging trail on 100 acres that is adjacent to state game land, so it's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Along the road is one other cabin that's more of an old school trailer on cement blocks. Usually we only see people there when something is in season. Heading up to the cabin for Thanksgiving before deer season, and when we are rolling up to the first cabin on the road we hear shooting, not uncommon, and honk the horn to let the people know we are coming up the road and to stop shooting. As the cabin comes in sight we see one guy holding a pistol. We stop to chat, and he says he's just at the camp for vacation. My uncle invites him up to our cabin for Thanksgiving dinner. Guy shows up for dinner, and seems totally normal. We talk about hunting, fishing, etc. Have a few drinks, and he heads back down the road towards the other cabin. A month later at Christmas my uncle casually says to me, "Hey, you remember that guy we had up to the camp for Thanksgiving dinner? Turns out he was hiding out from the police for killing his girlfriend TLDR. I unknowingly had Thanksgiving dinner with a murderer." My dorms in college had 6 guys, in 4 rooms. 2 doubles, 2 singles. We were all close, but 3 of us would hang out typically, and the other 3 would hang out. Those were our groups. Well, in my group, one night one of the guys starts telling us about how he loves college and parties. We are laughing along, saying how it's fun and all. He goes, "Yeah man, it's just too easy to get wasted girls back to your dorm." Man, and I thought he was a cool guy up to this point. We had to sit him down, explain to him why this is bad, what the repercussions could be, and that it needed to stop immediately. This was a 20-year-old. He was taken out on a stretcher one night, handcuffed down, after locking himself in our bathroom for about 3 hours. I haven't seen him since. I really hope he isn't still a rapist. He truly didn't see anything wrong with his actions. I stopped at this shitty yard sale in South Central Pennsylvania in a very rural area. 10 or 20 kids' toys on a sheet on the side of the road outside a trailer by a field. I drive my car a lot for work, so I'm looking for any excuse to get out. Plus I have a young son, so bonus I get to spoil him with some junk. I stop and it's just me and this younger, well-worn woman. So, me being a talker, just asked how things had been going with her sale. Casual and usually brushed off about whether and sales are good. Not with this poor soul. She mentioned she was selling her kid's toys because he got sick and had died. She delivered that like it was the weather, and that was the happy news. For over 45 minutes, she told me about her difficulty to have children, the many miscarriages and stillbirths, and finally being successful with this child. How he got sick and died after a long fight. His medical issues in great detail. Oddest of all, to me, was how she explained all her gynecological issues about her sex organs, how they didn't work, and what they had tried. I'm a dude, a very scruffy dude, not someone anyone would talk about their gynecological issues. This was a talk that bored to your soul. I give her the 50 cents for a trinket and leave. I get home a half hour late and my wife is mad. I was just said you have no idea. I worked at my uncle's business for about a year during college. He's in the floral industry and has some high profile customers. Housewives of Ock, works with event planners that deal with celebrities, YouTube PPL, high-end companies, etc. Really cool. One day I was ringing up an older lady and her friends and we were chatting about stuff, just casual, and turns out her husband went to the same school I was attending and for the same major. I was intrigued because I've met quite a few accountants there and always had nice chats about their jobs and careers. Pretty motivating. Chat continues. She tells me about her, asks what plans I have after college, and I tell her I want to pursue a CPA license and that I have a job lined up with a prestigious firm. She then says in a condescending tone, "Oh wow, how did you get a job there? They don't hire just anyone." I was weirded out and tried not to make much of it and told her I've had my offer for a few months. As I'm handing her her receipt she says with a giggle, "I suppose you're still going to be working here while you study for your CPA. I mean, you're already used to being poor, am I right?" She has a huge grin and walks away. I was left speechless and felt like complete shit. Melinda from Your Belinda, California. Fuck you, old woman. One of my former best friends let it casually drop in a group text that she wanted us to meet the guy she was sorta seeing. Problem was, she was married, and the 2 other people already knew she had been cheating on her husband for 4.5 months. It hit me like a bomb as all the pieces and inconsistencies in her and her husband's behavior over the last 5 months came together in my head. To make matters worse, I was hanging out with the 2 other people at the time she sent the text, and they started cheering and celebrating. So while I'm sitting between the 2 of them, I started doubting myself and questioning my own sanity, and everything about what was just said is absolutely horrible, but people are genuinely acting like it's the best thing ever. Am I the crazy one? Kind of way. And on top of that, it came at the end of a pretty shitty day at work. I worked at a petting zoo, and that morning I found the 23-year-old donkey dead in its yard. Had to drag its body out by hand through 6 inches of snow with 2 other people. A ball python had escaped its tank overnight, and I had to fish it out from under a fish tank, and the chicken enclosure partially flooded and had to be cleaned out. One of my old ex-girlfriends told me about how she had been literally sold as a baby by her bio mother to someone who sexually abused her while she was elementary school age. She got back rescued from that life by a school counselor who got the police involved and managed to adopt her. Shortly thereafter, said school counselor's husband started sexually abusing her too. To this day I'm kind of astounded she, the ex-G/F, was pretty stable mentally/emotionally by the time I met her. And before she told me all this, I had been aware she was adopted and that there'd been some serious shit that had gone down in her family life regarding her friends staging some kind of intervention to get her to go to the police about something a few years before I met her. So I'm fairly certain it was entirely true. As a second and far less disturbing discussion I once had, one of my friends once told me out of the blue that he'd needed therapy for a while because he'd hit and killed a bicyclist who'd ridden out of a blind intersection and in front of his car. Warning, this is gross. Many years ago a friend told me he thought he had cancer cause he had a lump at the tip of his penis. He was 30 years old, and without even having it checked out had got himself into this "it's okay, I've had a good life, if I die type mental state with it. I and others told him to stop being stupid and go and get it checked out. Note, this guy was a virgin. So off to the doctors he goes. He explains to doctor. She says to him, "I'm going to pull back your foreskin now." She said, "What?" He replied, not realizing that this was a thing. To her horror, she found what can only be described as 30 years worth of smegma build up under his foreskin. Being a virgin and really naive about all things such, I think he came from a super religious family. He had no idea that the foreskin rolls back and it's all supposed to be kept very clean. He also admitted to us he'd never seen a naked lady before, had never even seen a vagina in photographs. I was just absolutely shocked that he'd decided to actually admit to everyone the reason for this cancerous lump he found was actually because he had the dirtiest penis in the entire world. Sorry/not sorry for sharing this. There was this guy who would always be at this small coffee shop/bakery that me and the co-workers I was friends with went to regularly after work. I assumed that he worked nearby. He was pretty chillimo. He sort of became friends with us through the months we would see him at the shop. One of my co-workers and I were both smokers at the time, so was this guy, so we spent a decent amount of time just smoking/talking outside of the shop. One day it was just me and this guy smoking outside, and he just lays it on me. He says that he killed his girlfriend last month. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? He explained that his girlfriend lived out of town and he wanted her to come visit that weekend. She didn't want to, but he convinced her by telling her that he already bought her a bus ticket. So she ended up agreeing to come visit. Apparently, that bus got in an accident and she died due to the crash. He says that it was all his fault for pushing her to come into town that weekend. He was really beating himself up about it. I just sat on the ground outside with him and told him that it wasn't his fault and that shit was just dumb awful bad luck. He just told me not to tell anyone about it. I never told anyone else. Not even my co-workers that knew him. He never came back to the coffee shop again. Never heard from him again. The night of my high school graduation, my grandparents wanted to do something special for me, so they took me to my favorite steak place. While at dinner my grandpa got to talking about his service during WW2. I used to love hearing about when he was in the Navy, but some of the stories could get a little gruesome. On this particular night he was telling us his story about his old war buddy who always boasted that he was invincible, that ain't no bullet ever gonna kill me. As the story goes, Grandpa and his friend were on a beach somewhere for some ungodly reason, and amidst a battle, Grandpa goes on to say that while he and his buddy were advancing, a shell exploded in front of him to the right, knocking him back and kicking up a bunch of sand. He said when he got up that he couldn't see his buddy or hear anything but ringing. Apparently the explosion had kicked up so much sand that it buried his friend alive, and by the time they had figured it out / dug him out, he was already dead. Realistically, he could have been killed in the explosion or even the hundreds of pounds of dirt that fell on him. But it was what my grandpa said next that really just shocked me. I remember Grandpa saying with humor in his voice, well, War Buddy's name always did say that there wasn't a bullet on earth with his name on it. Guess he was right after all. He said it with such nonchalance and a smirk on his face that made me lose my appetite. Kid I knew growing up was found on top of a building having overdosed. He had been having a rough time, so it was chalked up to intentional overdose / suicide. Flash forward 3 years, and I'm sitting in a hot tub with people I don't know. They find out I went to the school of the kid and kind of was friends with him. And then one guy, in a braggadocious way, told me that they had moved his body. He had started to overdose inside the building, and instead of calling medical help, they moved his body to the roof so they wouldn't get caught doing drugs. It's been a decade, and I'm still haunted by that. Before anyone asks, no, I didn't tell the family because they were having their own issues. I learned his body had been moved like 3 years after it happened, so I surmised by then they had moved on, and to tell them would be opening up a new wound. The parents have since died. I was a working musician in college, subbing in a band of folks I mostly didn't know. We were hired to play at some sort of fraternity / sorority weekend getaway, which involved us staying overnight at the cabin site they had rented. So, we had a lot of downtime when we weren't playing to just drink and hang out. The whole thing was sort of a low-fee version of college bashes from 80s movies. People were getting belligerent, fighting, making out, etc. And in the midst of it all there was a girl who was totally out of place, very sweet and friendly, who took to talking to the band. And at one point, when she was out of earshot, the bassist, who I had never met before that day, leaned over to me and said, "You know, she's really sweet, but somebody needs to just put a dick in her mouth." And honestly, 15+ years later, that remains one of the most offensive things I've ever heard. Because it came totally unprompted and was delivered as though it was an unquestionably appropriate thing to say, and an example of how this person viewed and reacted to a genuinely nice and gentle person. It still floors me. In my teens I got some temp work at a hardware store. I was only going to be there 3 days a week for 4 weeks. A few days in, the manager that was training me was moving the forklift in the warehouse and said something along the lines of, "Stay out of the way. If I run over anyone else they'll take away my license." He was a pretty funny guy, so I chuckled at his pretty funny joke. Then, totally unprovoked, he proceeded to tell me in great detail all 3 people who he had previously run over in his car. One was a tweaker who had ran up to his car at a stop to bang on the window and beg for drug money. When he went to pull away she jumped in front of his car to stop him, and he ran over her. He said he immediately stopped, and she was so drugged out that even with the car pinning her to the ground she just kept babbling about needing $20. Another was while he was a cop, and he was trying to cut off a robbery in progress. The perp ran out of the alley right in front of him. I can't remember the third story, but he segued this one into explaining how he stopped being an officer after less than a year of finishing academy, because one time he responded to a domestic abuse call, and upon arrival, found the husband sexually abusing his daughter, with the mother who called sobbing helplessly in the corner. Said after that he knew he just wasn't cut out for that kind of work. Those 12 days were a wake-up call for me in a lot of ways, but boy was I not expecting to be told any of that by someone who up until then had only really told me how to properly break down a cardboard box. I work at an airport as a screener, think sir, but for another country. We work close to the custom officers, and with COVID pretty much having the airport pretty empty, I ended up chatting with one of the custom officers about things they encountered and whatnot. The way he casually told me was kinda wild. So here's the story. So there was this couple with a baby flying from Jamaica and they were on their way to another country. Flight attendant was getting them settled in the plane and making sure everything was alright. She noticed the baby was awfully quiet and they seemed nice and all and was very polite. But when hours went by the baby never cried or made a peep, nor could she see the baby very well. Thought it was weird cause she deals with a lot of crying children and thought something was wrong. So she tipped one of the custom officers off cause it seemed kinda odd. So they pull the couple aside and check them out and they were clear, and then they finally get to the baby. Turns out it was a dead baby stuffed with cocaine and they were trying to smuggle it into the country. He even said the baby was still warm. Honestly, one of the most faked up stories I ever heard. My dad would tell me stories about his school experience before I was old enough to go to school. The system had changed since, but for why/oh me didn't know. Story 1. His teacher used to lift children by their hair as punishment. My dad got a buzz cut, and she still did it. 2. Grade 8. They played hockey in the gym, with the teacher involved. Teacher dude got too into it, and ended up shinning a guy, so my dad did it back. As punishment the dude put him in a chair with his arms up on the rests, got up on a table, and jump strapped him. He was doing it to get a reaction out of my dad, so he just stared at him angrily. 3. Grade 1. Last day of school, everyone is wearing their Sunday best. The teacher puts up a simple multiplication question on the chalkboard. If anyone can answer this, I'll let you all out early. He then calls on this little girl in a white dress. Of course, no one has learned multiplication yet. She sits there, unable to answer, so the teacher starts bashing her face in the chalkboard. He keeps doing this, over time I presume, until her dress is red in the front with blood. And that's the faked up stories I heard about the 70s in rural SK. I did not want to start school. I was at work in Staples, and I was helping customers. I saw a lady struggling with some file organizers, and trying to figure out what she needed. I walked over to her, and asked how could I help you today? And she says well the folders I bought didn't have any of the tabs for the labels, and I was wondering if I could return this box, but I was just gonna buy another box instead of making a scene. I said oh of course we can return this, and we can just take the ones you need and go to the front. She stops in her tracks and just stares into space. I was super confused, and I turned around and asked if everything was alright. This is where I made a mistake. She looked me dead in the eyes and said the folders are for me to file the papers for husband's death. He was murdered last week, and I had to be the one to walk in on the scene. There was blood everywhere. He was in a chair tied up in my living room and I just sat speechless, not sure what to do. And she continued, our son doesn't know he died from being murdered. He thinks his dad died from a heart attack and I just don't have the courage to tell him. And again I'm standing there speechless, confused, and feeling horribly bad. I walked her to the front and checked her out and she left, never saw her again. I wonder if she is okay. Not much compared to the stories here, but it scared the hell out of me. My fiance casually told me she was currently in a car accident. I was at work when she calls me asking where her wallet was. I was working construction at the time, so being on the phone while working was a no-no, so I was a little taken aback as to why she was calling. I told her I didn't know, but she kept insisting that I knew, and suddenly she tells me she found it in the back seat. I ask why. She says, oh, because I got into an accident. Her and her friend, are in the ditch. So I ran from work, and when I got there her vehicle was destroyed. Both front and back bumper were probably in the pile of the millions of pieces on the highway. Both front and back windshields were gone, and the driver's side door was partially crushed. Turns out while she was coming from an off-ramp, a big truck changed lanes immediately behind her, hit her so hard that her vehicle spun around, apparently made no attempt to slow down, because the truck hit her a second time, and her vehicle went flying into the ditch. Her shock is what scared me the most. She seemed totally fine until I was driving us home, and without warning she had no idea where she was. Immediate red flag. Took her to emergency that second and discovered she had a concussion. Shock is a scary thing. Back around 88, 89 after going to class at George Brown College, a few classmates and I walked down to Toronto's harbourfront to watch them knock down these giant concrete grain silos. They were at least 150 feet tall. As we were watching, we were joined by a security guard and a bunch of onlookers. The security guard had worked there for many years, and he told this story of something that happened back in the 70s. Some new guy started working at the silos for inspection. There's a walkway at the very top and hatches people can open to check the level of how full the silo is. It was dark and this guy decides to check it using a lighter. You probably know where this is going. If you have a dusty combustible material inside a container and introduce a match, you get a boom. In this case, a really big boom. 10 stories of boom. It did not destroy the silo, but the entire force of the explosion was focused through that one open hatch, right where that guy was standing. Apparently his body, or most of it, was found somewhere around Woodbine Beach over 2 kilometers away. 8 years ago I was working at a pharmacy and saw a lady in the digestive health section who had been standing there a while. I went over to ask if she needed any help, which she responded yes, so I got close and tried to find out what she needed. Instead of telling me about her guts, she proceeded to tell me all about the tragic life and death of her sister. That included things like rape, domestic abuse, drug use/abuse and suicide. She seemed very nonchalant about the whole thing, like as if she was telling me about some Vegas she just bought. I was 17 and had no idea what to do, so I just stood there for about half an hour while this woman I had never met before told me this horrific tale, and my boss glared at me. At one point I managed to squeak out, "And I'm so sorry to hear that," to which she chuckled and said, "Oh no need dear, it hasn't affected me one bit." Now about these laxatives. To say I needed to take a break once she had paid and left the store is a serious understatement. Too bad my boss didn't care about that and refused to let me have 5 minutes to decompress, but that's not important to the story. I still think about that woman and hope she's okay, but she seriously messed me up for that whole day. Fair warning, this is a pretty messed up story, and it is gross. I swear I'm retelling it as best as I can, but this goes back about 18 years ago. Edit. The whole thing was so faked up I haven't thought about it in a long time and the details easily came back to me as I began typing. Many years ago, when I worked retail, we got a new store manager that seemed like a nice guy, but quickly it was apparent that the dude was batshit crazy and a sociopath. Well, he happened to like me for one reason or another, and he invited me to some lunch function with him, the sales manager, and assistant sales manager. I was a tech, so the whole thing didn't make sense, but whatever. We're all chatting small talk waiting for the food to come, when the store manager decided to share a small glimpse into his past. When he was fresh out of high school, his folks had purchased him an old muscle car. One evening him and a friend decided it would be a great idea to play chicken with one another. His girlfriend was in the passenger seat of his car and the friend was in his car alone. Unfortunately, it seems these guys were both psychotic cause neither of them ended up veering out of the way and they piled into each other. Neither car had airbags. The store manager then went into the details of the post-collision. He woke up with blood streaming down his face and ended up having to flip his scalp up off his eyes back onto his head as it was lacerated to the skull and folded down. His girlfriend was decapitated, so he left her alone and apparently shuffled out of his car to check on his friend in the other car. His friend was alive, but the manager found him with his jaw shattered up into his throat and the guy was struggling to breath. So the manager took 2 fingers, forced them into the throat above the bone and gore, and yanked all of that shit out of the guy's throat. As he was wrapping up those details, our food arrived. The story kind of ended awkwardly, and it was apparent from the looks on the other guys' faces besides the store manager, that we were all like, what the fuck were we just told? My sister used to live quite far away from me. Her husband was quite well off, so they would go on vacations all the time. They had a big house that he built that was still under construction while they were first living there. We didn't get along well, but I still tried to call her once in a while to talk. One day I was talking to her on the phone and she casually told me that her one dog died. They went on vacation for several weeks, so she locked the dogs under her deck while they were away. She accidentally left a basement window open though, and the one dog fell through the window, hit its head, and died locked in the basement. She told me this like she was talking about getting coffee or picking up her mail. Completely casual. I'm a big animal lover and the entire story left me sick to my stomach. Locking the dogs under the deck. What the hell? I placed an anonymous call to animal control about it, but afterwards we fell out of contact for many years, so I never found out if anything came of it. When she resurfaced in my life, she was completely crazy and out of control. She lost her kids, her husband, and ended up in and out of psych wards and jailhouses for several years. She was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia. I met a friend through GTA Online. She was nice and hilarious. She was about 19 or 20 and still lived with her mom. We were doing supercar races one day and we were having fun. In the background, I heard an older female yelling at her, and she yells back, "No, put the stick away." I was confused and asked her what in the blue hell that was. She just says, "My mom beats me." I had no idea what to say. I was hit as a child many times, but it was discipline. Or so I thought. I started playing with her less frequently after that until she invited me to a party again. For those who don't know GTA Online, you can run illegal operations like cocaine lockups, weed farms, meth labs and document and cash forgery. We were restocking her cocaine lockup when her mom heard her say, "We bout to get so much money from this coke restock." Poor choice of words. Her mom yelled at her, asking what she was doing, and from what I heard, she was being smacked around. Pots were banging, plates were smashing, and I heard shouting. I left the game and her party, and haven't played with her since. I don't know her real name, I don't know her personally, but it sucks that she got beat for saying coke. I can't ask her about that, because it might touch a nerve for her, and she's probably gonna yell. If you read my entire story, take this. It will help you on your journey through life. House party where I didn't know anyone there except one person. Met a dude while doing drugs and drinking. Super laid back and chill, great sense of humor similar to mine. Guy had just moved into town and was there because he knew mutual people from his recent girlfriend. Dude wanted to go see his girlfriend on the other side of town, but didn't want to go by himself as it was 1 to 2 am. Said fuck it, I'm faded af, a nice cool breezy walk sounds chill. San Diego at the time. Two 17-year-old kids walking in the dark at 2 am to this dude's girlfriend's home. Fortunately, I knew the girl. She was super faking cool, and I did a ton of drugs with her brother. She was on the TV show where kids go live with stricter parents and learn discipline. Can't remember what the fuck it's called right now. I have a strong sense of empathy and I make friends really easily. So being able to talk and connect with people comes naturally for me. Dude I was walking with casually mentions that he killed somebody halfway into our 3-hour walk. Goes into detail. He went to buy drugs and his seller attempted to rob him. Seller chased him down and they both began wrestling over seller's handgun. Dude gained the upper hand and shot the seller multiple times. He started crying when he told me this. Wasn't really sure how to act when he told me this. He told me it was why he moved across state to stay with his mom. I ended up letting him cry and only said something along the lines of, "Well, it was either you or him." He laughed, changed the subject, and we ended up going on quite the adventure that night. Got lost, didn't get home till like 7 to 8 am. I stayed friends with him for a little bit after but eventually drifted apart after he moved back with his dad. I'm not sure whatever became of him as a dude deleted his FB a while back. A friend in uni told me about the abuse her dad dealt out when she was a kid. It's not that she didn't realize it was abuse while telling me, it's that she just said it like she was talking about what happened in a movie she saw yesterday. She said how, before she was born, he tried to crash the car so her mother would miscarry. She used to get the sheet beaten out of her. Literally, he'd beat her until she shat and pissed herself and threw up over tiny things like squirting him with a water pistol or dropping a drink in the carpet. She told me how she was at one point, as a child, forced to watch as he raped her mother in front of her and told her this is what happens to women. She told me how he poured gasoline over the family and was ranting about how he was going to set them on fire. The most chilling part though was when she said, "I've come to realize that what happened to me was abuse," completely straight-faced while talking about people coming to terms with abuse. Like, she wasn't joking. It was actually in doubt for her whether that was abuse. It was at that moment that I realized there is no upper limit for how much abuse you can just get used to. If a person can go through that and then have to later realize it's abuse, there's no way in hell you can just expect a person to do something about it at the time. There's no way in hell you can expect a person to know what's really how the world works and what's just lessons they learned from abuse. If someone can go through all that and not realize they're being abused, how the hell can any of us know? Actually, I said something I shouldn't have in too much of a casual situation. I still think about it to this day. In college 6 years ago, I had a really close high school friend of mine go through the windshield of his 68 Ford Mustang. He was rebuilding it and hadn't installed seat belts yet, probably never was going to either, and he lost control of the car. Through a series of events I was able to take a look at the crash scene pictures as the police were suspicious it was a hit and run. I could have opted to not look. I should not have, but I did. And I don't even remember why I was offered the chance. It was all such a blur. But I will absolutely have those pictures imprinted into my brain forever. A couple years later I still hadn't really talked about it to anyone. It was tough to bring up. I was eating dinner with some college friends on the anniversary of his accident, and I just couldn't not say something. I wanted to talk about it. Everyone was with me until I told them I looked at the pictures. Then they were all mortified. Only one person responded with, "Why the fuck did you do that?" And "I don't know" was my answer. I shrugged, kind of like it was asking me who won the game last night. PSH, I don't know. I think I was trying to show that I was not as traumatized by it than I actually was. I didn't want to lay it on too thick at first, I guess. It probably made me look like a monster though. It was a weird time, and I regret both parts of the story. Shock is a wild thing. I was working on a loading dock at a home improvement store. So we are in and out of tractor trailers all day to unload. So there is the tractor trailer and the steel ramp that is part of the bay. Once they pull in, we lift the ramp in place so we can walk in and out with no gap. Of course, being in a hurry and being young and dumb, if there is nothing large or only a few items on the truck, we will just hop in and hop out. The gap is only about a foot, sometimes less. So one day one of the guys hopped into the truck and then walks back out. Whoosh, leg straight down the gap. So on leg up on the dock, one down between the truck and the wall. 3 of us are right there and grab him before he can fall all the way off the dock. After some very unathletic grabs and heaves, he is up on the dock and we all go into the "Juju okay" chorus to make sure he is fine before we lay into him for making a mistake that anyone could make, as guys do. So he is up and kind of chuckling, and he is like, "No man, I'm gonna need to go to the hospital." Confused by the tone, I take a step back to look at his leg. He is standing, supported by a guy holding him up under his arm, but favoring his right leg, which is very bloody. Then I notice a trail of blood back to the dock where he fell, like a good solid visible blood trail. I pull out my cell to call 911. While I'm looking back at him, I see about a 8 by 2 inch piece of meat hanging by a thread of skin on his right leg. Over the next minute or two, while we are absolutely sprinting around finding managers, getting him a place to sit, looking through first aid kits, like there is anything in there that will remotely help with this, he pipes up again loud enough to hurt on a loading dock, but calm and almost joking, "Guys, get me an ice pack, maybe a few, and say this. He is now pointing at the meat that has fallen off his leg. The guy who is propping him up on that side throws up, luckily not on it. Most of us just about join in, and the injured guy's laughing. Again, this all happened in like a minute, and as soon as we got a chair under him, he was out cold. But it was nuts. By far worst injury I have seen, and the dude was acting like he felt nothing, like one initial yell when he fell, but after that it was like he was have a grand old time watching us all freak out. Guy was fine, never came back to work officially, but did stop in to touch base with everyone and thank us, and make fun of us for running around like a bunch of girls that never saw a boo-boo before. This one is a combination of horrifying and hilarious, but here it goes. I parked in the parking lot outside my apartment and was gathering my stuff out of the backseat to head into my apartment building. To set the scene, this was in the middle of a bright sunny day. There were birds chirping and it was beautiful weather. A neighbor from the other building was out at his car, so I said hello because I wanted to be a nice neighbor. He returned my greeting and struck up a conversation. Before I know it, he tells me he's seen my girlfriend and I around, and I'm a very lucky man as she is a beautiful woman. At this point I'm thinking, this is mildly uncomfortable, but he's just trying to say something nice. This is where it takes an interesting turn. The guy launches into a half statement, half question to the effect of the sex must be out of this world. He tells me I should spend all of my time having sex with my girlfriend. Now I feel weird and am looking for a way to pivot out of the conversation and into the safety of my apartment so I can spend the next couple hours debating ever leaving it again. That's when it happened. While reaching into his car, which we have somehow moved towards during our conversation, he says, "Man, you gotta get yourself one of these." At which point he pulls from the driver's side door compartment, I shit you not, the biggest cork ring that I have ever seen. He tells me how it helps him last for hours and how hard he stays while he's wearing it. Meanwhile, I'm wondering why the hell it's in the side door compartment of his car. When was the last time he used it? Has he cleaned it? Is he trying to get me to hold? Is it socially acceptable to run away while he's in the middle of a sentence? Shortly thereafter I was able to extricate myself from the proceedings and flee to the safety of my apartment. I spent the night looking for new rentals. TLDR, dude showed me his magnum-sized cork ring for his magnum dong in the middle of a beautiful suburban parking lot. Got a dodgy cab, a friend of a shifty-looking Uber driver, from Leicester Square to Cork Fosters after a few beers with friends. I sat in the front and my two pals passed out in the back. Had a lovely conversation with the driver on this 30-minute journey about how he used to rape some of his female passengers and knock them about, and also how he has got in fight with people and held a gun on them. It was in very graphic detail, and in his efforts to describe the horror of his victims he was almost very calm and softly spoken so it was very unexpected. As you can imagine I wasn't impressed, I was horrified. I was about to say fuck this, get out of the cab, until he said open the glove compartment, jeez, and there it was, a gun. So don't think you can do a runner without paying. Bit odd considering it was on my side of car. I sought the rest of journey terrified of what might happen. Got to near my place, I'm not stupid, and literally dragged my two pals out of the car, paid the diver, and called the police. My two pals don't believe this happened as they were out for the whole journey. In a staff room of a school in a country outside of Europe and America during lunch break, a guy I taught with was oh so casually describing how he blacked out in a shopping mall and broke a woman's arm after she touched his son. He elaborated by saying he didn't get in trouble because a security guard saw what happened and he agreed the action was just. Taken back by the story, I asked him what's the worst thing that's happened when he's blacked out. This is where things took a turn for the worse, when he replied almost instantly, I killed someone. Not knowing how to respond myself, and one or two other colleagues say in disbelief as he said it. Eventually someone asked what had happened, and he basically said he'd seen someone who'd killed his girlfriend, so he threw him in front an oncoming bus in the middle of London. At this point I again asked about the consequences of his action, to which he replied, it was okay, because there were two undercover police officers at the bus station who saw it, and they knew he'd killed my girlfriend. Silence ensued and the conversation wound down as no one really knew what to say. The guy had a bit of a reputation of some colorful stories, but admitting to assault and actual murder during a casual lunchtime chat with colleagues was certainly the most horrific thing that's been casually told to me. I've got two. When I was young and pretty new to dating, I went on a date with a girl who, during dinner, casually told me she was Heinrich Himmler's granddaughter. We were talking about family and it segued into culture and background. After she told me that, I mentioned that my entire family was Jewish. My second one was a roommate who was super toxic. He would constantly leave messes on or in the toilet and forget them or not clean them up. One day he clogged the toilet with a massive sheet and just left it there. I waited for a while to see if he would just be an adult and clean up his own poop without needing to be reminded or asked. This was not the case. Several hours later the poop is still clogging the toilet, and he starts to head out the door to leave. I ask him to clean up his tiki before taking off for the night, and his response was, "Why, haven't you just faking killed yourself already?" Mind you, this was the last month he was living at our home, and he was already having blowouts with all the rest of the house, so him saying this was a product of him being a volatile and toxic a-hole, and not entirely out of the blue. Still though, telling someone to kill themselves when they ask you to clean up their own sheet from the toilet was a pretty intense 0 to 10 moment. Not a mutual friend, but he's an acquaintance, barely. One of my good friends used to kick it with him during his massive depressive phase. 6-year relationship gone. Mother torn from family in another country, and we both used to know him from middle school. Anyhow, one night I was taking them both back to my friend's house for some casual drinking and billiards. This guy, who I'll refer to as absolute human scum or AHS, regaled us a story of how he and his friend beat the living shit out of some homeless guy near a bar alley. Friend is too drunk to even comprehend, let alone remember, but I did. I also remember AHS telling us how he always gets blackout drunk and usually violent. Well, he regales yet another memory of when he almost shot his friend in the head with a high point. Intentionally. While being blackout drunk, and while his friend was driving, because his friend said something along the lines of, "I don't want to do that, you're faking wasted," and if I remember, which I kinda don't, it was a burglary. Bonus, I drove AHS home once when he was drunk at my friend's house and he lived on the way. Well, my friend is a faking social media fuckboy, and he made post with one of my guns from our last strange visit. AHS asked about it, and friend said it was actually mine. Anyhow, he's in my car and says, "Yo, friend told me you had that really nice piece. You got that sheet in here?" Well, tell ya, I remembered his story, and I preemptively took my CC pistol and put it in my inner coat pocket. Luckily it was winter, so big coat. Seriously, fuck that guy. I'd shoot him dead and society would be better for it. But that's not my decision. After college I was doing some contract work for the local health authority, and one of the sites I got sent to was the main mental health facility for the region, which was out in the countryside. It was pretty chill for the most part, but the building in which they housed the criminally insane, Building 3, was basically a high security prison. I only had to go in there once, but it was a scary place full of scary people. So anyhow, me and the team were having lunch in the staff cafeteria in one of the low security buildings when I heard someone across the room call my name. When I saw who it was, my blood froze. You know how kids are as holes? Well, this was that weird kid from K-12 that everyone gave grief, and then you learned they had a faked up home situation and feel retroactively bad as an adult, but you were still an asshole. Definitely not someone you want to bump into in a mental institution. She's acting like we're old friends, and I'm trying my best to be amicable, but I'm actually terrified about the whole situation. So I bet you're wondering what I'm doing here. In my mind, please be working here. Well, I killed 3 people. I was locked up in Building 3 for a while, but I'm better now. Sweating profusely. Oh. That's unfortunate. She said some other stuff that I was too petrified to comprehend, and then gotta go by and left. 2 of my 3 coworkers started asking about my new girlfriend and cracking jokes. Did you not hear the part where she killed 3 people? We need to go. And they just kept cracking jokes, at least until my 3rd, equally terrified coworker who had been listening to our conversation confirmed it. We jetted the FO and I checked my trunk and back seat before leaving every night after that. An old coworker of mine used to constantly bring up weird details about his life with little to no prompting. My 2nd day on the job and 1st day working with him, he told me about how his girlfriend's ex-husband was currently in prison because she walked in on him sexually abusing their 2 kids. Later that day he revealed he had had kids with 2 different women and they were both suing him concurrently. He used to deal cocaine and apparently once sold to Ashton Kutcher. He said that on 2 different occasions he lost $100,000 because of drugs, and it was only one of the times was his fault. He hadn't done his taxes in 3 years. He constantly told stories about the numerous fights he'd been in. In one of them, he almost killed a guy because of a dispute over a fishing spot of all things. He said that they had both pulled knives, and if I had had my gun on me, he wouldn't be alive right now. Apparently the fight only stopped because a cop showed up and stopped them before they killed each other. He once claimed that he and his Linebacker buddy got into a fight at a house party and beat up like 100 Mexicans. Phone call for a rental car company I was dispatching roadside assistance for at the time. Customer had been involved in a wreck on the interstate. Life pro tip: suddenly cutting off a Chrysler Town & Country in your Mazda Miata when you're both going 70 miles per hour may have negative consequences for your health. I'm getting the obligatory accident report filled out, asking the required questions. Me: was anybody injured in the accident? Customer: yeah. M: a member of your party or someone in the other vehicle. C: a girl in the other car. They're airlifting her to nearest major hospital. M: well, I'm glad they reacted promptly, and I hope she gets the help she needs. C: yeah, no, the cops say she's not gonna make it. Okay, 1. Didn't ask for a prognosis, and 2. Would it kill you to show any emotion in your voice but bored apathy? We are discussing a human life, you sociopath. Anyway, the police were impounding his first minivan to perform a forensic investigation to determine if he'd be liable for vehicular manslaughter, and the rental company absolutely refused to supply him a new vehicle pending the results of that. Dude started raging and screaming, demanded I transfer him to customer service. I was never so happy to transfer a call, and the customer service guy was never so miserable to receive one. I'm steady thinking, dude, I know this sucks. It doesn't even sound like it was your fault, but for real, though, you're out cab fare to the airport 17 miles away where both of our biggest competitors have rental counters, and the cost of initiating a new rental. In contrast, another person literally died. Perspective, man. Postscript: the girl totally died, by the way. I remembered the highway and exit where it happened, and watched the local news for the next couple days, until I got confirmation. Doer at the hospital. Young thing, was only a passenger in the car, not her fault. The guy driving cut the minivan off. If things had gone a bit different, she might be calling me tomorrow, broken down on her college campus with a flat battery, and needing me to take care of it. Got called out to the mall when I was 25 by another 25-year-old dude in the middle of the day. He was a friend of a really good friend and had told my friend that he was having a crisis and he needed a buddy. This guy was super weird, the kind of off where you know something is wrong but can't put your finger on it. I didn't want to go, but I promised my friend I would help with this kind of thing from time to time because he was a church leader at our church with a lot on his plate. I get to the mall and this guy is standing in a store taking and laughing with these super young looking cashiers. I walk up and I'm like, what the fuck, you said you were having a crisis. He goes, I am, these girls are DTF, and I got no wingman. He then makes a comment to the other girl that I was there for her and I thought she was cute. I looked this girl in the eye, she's clearly very uncomfortable. She'd been talking and laughing with him, but nervous laughter. I asked her how old she was, and she said 16. I flipped my absolute sheet and grabbed this guy by the throat and dragged him out of the store with the intention of beating him half to death. He gets loose and runs, and as I'm chasing him down, because I'm infuriated and don't care anymore, he confesses to banging a 14 years old, a 12 years old and a 10 years old, and then makes comments about my daughter, all in an attempt to calm me down. Bad idea. Security stops me from grabbing him, and he gets away. When I told my friend about it, he was shocked and said he just thought the guy had some form of mental disorder, not that he was a child molester. I still get mad about that day sometimes and think, if only I could have caught him. My Bill. Met him a few times in the beginning, but already kinda knew he was a bad guy. Still don't deal with him much, partly over fear, partly out of disgust. Over the years he's told me a lot of shit, most just in random conversations at family get-togethers. I literally hate this man, and understand now that there are psychos out there. And he's a huge guy, maybe 6 feet 2 and 280 pounds of pure muscle. Here's some things he's told me. The first faked up thing ever told me he beat his girlfriend, broke her face then tied her to a bed for 3 days. Did so she wouldn't be able to go to the cops. And she didn't. He was high on meth and thought she was cheating and she wasn't. Said like it was the best joke in the world. Broke into their grandma's house and stole her figurines so he could sell them. They were antique, worth a lot but also kind of one of a kind. Beat a different girlfriend in front of me when she made a point that went against his point. Constantly talks about killing people, and I believe him. Broke another girl's face. Not sure why, but he laughed like it's all good and funny and cheat. Found another girlfriend, says she's the best because when he tried to beat her, she fought back and hit him in the face with a gun. Knocked him out. They're frequently robbing people, doing and selling drugs, beating people up together. All kinds of ridiculous shit. They get pregnant. Proceed to smoke meth the entire pregnancy. His parents had to take the kid until they passed one drug test. Poor kid is still living with them. Eventually he's able to break her eye socket so she lied and said she was mugged. After the family found out and demanded justice was when we found out he did it. With the kid there they got high and broke all the windows in the house, TVs, everything breakable. And here's the current situation. Cops raided their home a few weeks ago. Been on their radar for years. 11 guns, controlled substances, weed, paraphernalia, scales, all kinds of scary shit. Oh, and to add, he has about 50 charges previously and never has went to prison. About 5 assaults, 2 dwees, like 20 drug felonies, like 10 previous gun charges, robbery, thefts. I mean everything. They're old as crappy. Grandma bails him out and hires the best every time. Pretty sure he rats people out too, but everyone's scared. I just told his family the other day while they boasted about how tough he is. Being tough isn't all that, and just because people don't want to fight you doesn't mean they won't find another way. Seems like I was right, and I honestly hope he dies in prison. Oh, he once tried to attack me at a family get together. Still not sure why. Meth rage or something. 2 guys were barely able to hold him while I left, and his parents could make him leave. I was visiting his grandma once and left my money in my car that I was just about to buy a crib for my baby that was on the way. He disabled her cameras, said they were defective. I left 30 minutes later and my window was busted out and money gone. Also took my toddler to visit the grandma and went downstairs to give him a nap. He grabbed a big ass bag of meth and bring it to me. Cue me screaming and yelling while they told me it was just sugar. It wasn't. And yes, I told on him every chance I got. The family currently thinks he doesn't deserve prison. He's trying to be better. Guys, hair's not just a pose. Hair's a psychopath in a huge bodybuilding body that hates women and minorities. Fact, this dude. I was at GameStop and the clerk was a high school friend of a friend. I'm checking out and she says quite nonchalantly, you know CJ died? Literally dropped me to the floor in the mall. CJ was one of my best friends from late high school, through college, and into adulthood. We dated for about a year. It didn't work out simply because she's a free spirit and I knew I would hold her back from living the most CJ life she could. I'm not cut out for Burning Man. She's not cut out for small town living. She lived fast and fun and carefree. She moved from state to state. She met a man, got married a month later, and they died in a horrific car crash briefly after that. It's 6 years later now. My life is completely different. I have a wife I didn't even know back then. I have kids. I still think about her every day. I think of how she brightened the life of everyone in her orbit. I cry when I realize she's not in the world anymore. And when I see people living a more interesting life than me, I feel her spirit. And I found out while paying for tech and faking 5. This will get buried because the post is 9 hours old, but I still need to tell it. A few years back a circle of work colleges were sharing stories of horrible apartments, bad landlords and sketchy buildings. Then the talk got around to bad neighbors. One of those colleges told us a story laughing all the while about how she had an older foreign neighbor she had not gotten along with for the reason of They would have parties till 1 AM, and when he'd tell them to turn down the music they would turn it up till the cops came. Once the cops left they would turn it back up and pound on the walls. They would regularly fuck with this guy, including drunk guests being sent to piss on his door and writing deceased on his mail. They tied off his door by tying a rope between his door and the door across, so the hand of his door was bound with rope to the door across the hall, making him call the fire department. They used his address and phone number to sign up for every get-rich-quick scheme and catalog they could find. This all occurred in the 1980s. She referred to him by several racial epithets for Pakistanis several times. Up until this point I had thought of her as a nice older woman who got along good with other people and their customers, only to discover she was a sociopath who had started all this because they were blasting a stereo at high volume at 1 in the morning on a Thursday. I still never forget the stony faces of 5 out of the 7 of us sitting here, and my boss laughing just as hard as she was telling this story. TLDR, at the bottom, me and my friend met up at my house once, and as he was leaving, he noticed my height marks on the doorframe of my room. He was mindlessly rambling about how he did that too, but he doesn't know if the marks were still there. Side note, I didn't really know any details about his family situation at that point. I asked why. Did you remove it when you moved? He said no, his father still lived there, only his mom and he moved out, but he doesn't know if his father painted over it by now or something. He told me he hasn't seen his father in like over a year, even though he lives just on block from his new home. And here comes the icing on the cake. He told me in passing that his dad has leukemia/cancer and that he isn't even 100% sure he's still alive because he hasn't seen him for so long. When he was a child, he noticed that his dad took medicine, but he never thought about it and no one in the family ever directly spoke about it. When he met his father over a year ago, he outright said that he had leukemia for the first time and it hit him like a truck. Everything made so much sense now. Why his dad was always so tired and couldn't play with him much, etc. He didn't know how to react and just soaked it up for the rest of their meeting, but hasn't found the courage to contact him again since because he doesn't know how to react. It was news for him that his dad has had cancer the entire time. My friend was 19 at the time. He noticed that I was getting pretty uncomfortable at that point. My friend was never one to share his emotions or what was really going on in his life, and he apologized for unloading all that on me. I said it was fine and that I'm sorry he has to go through that. He joked that it wasn't my fault and we said goodbye and he left. TLDR, friend told me that his father has had leukemia without him knowing for basically his entire life, and he isn't even sure if his father is still alive because he hasn't seen him in over a year. 2 instances that stick with me really. A new guy in work that told me he had killed twice in the past. The first one, he turned up to a party with a shotgun looking for a girl that was talking to his girlfriend. Found him and shot him twice. Apparently only got put down for manslaughter. Second one, he had a kid to said girlfriend, and one night he lost the plot and stabbed her twice in the neck. Dead instantly. He then called his brother to come and burn the house down. We found his name. Our manager had no clue at the time. Lo and behold, he was sacked. I don't know how the manager had the bottle to do it. One time I was at a friend's 18th birthday party. We met a bunch of new guys and girls. This girl took a particular interest in me, or so it seemed. After about 10 minutes of talking, she just straight up said "I've been raped twice, you know." I said "Excuse me?" I genuinely didn't have a response. She then started to go into detail about how it was guy she had hooked up with and it got out of hand, but that she enjoyed it. I was super confused. She then went over to my mate, went inside and slept with him before I could even warn him about what might happen or be said. In 8th grade, I was on my way to the park to meet some friends. I was riding my bike down the sidewalk of a fairly small suburban neighborhood when a man in a pickup truck pulled out of the driveway straight into me on my bike. I thought he could see me because the front of the truck was facing me, but he was on his phone. It wasn't bad. I was a little scratched up but otherwise fine. He got straight out to make sure I was okay and asked if I needed to call anyone or anything, but I was so used to getting left behind by my friends that I just wanted to get there so they wouldn't leave without me. I told him it was fine and just left. In hindsight, I needed better friends. I got there, and the conversation went like this. Friend 1, hey, what took you so long? Me, sorry, I live across town. Friend 2, are you okay? Me, yeah, why? F2, your face is bleeding. Me, what? I hadn't noticed. Oh shoot. F1, what happened? Me, I got hit by a truck. Priceless. This was a few months ago, back in 2019 when me and the person were still friends. We'd just had a casual sleepover and were talking about life and shit, as teenagers do. Now beforehand, I'd heard from people they'd been friends with that they were a liar and always made up bullshit stories for attention and whatnot, and cheated on people heaps. I can't remember how it was brought up, but we started talking about our backstories, where we'd come from, what life was like up until that point, things like that. And they told me that they had a boyfriend. They were 11 to 14 at the time, I think, and they were in love and planning a future with each other. Except one day the boyfriend dragged the friend into their back shed, confessed his love to them and that they'll miss them, then slit his throat in front of the person, spraying blood over them. They ended up telling the boyfriend's dad and was planning on naming their firstborn son after him. I have no idea if it's true or not, but man, that story faked me up for weeks. I'm not friends with them anymore and haven't spoken to them since they cheated on their last ex, and blocked a bunch of people defending the dude who was cheated on. The girl I was casually seeing before I met my wife was a stripper. Yeah, red flags all over the place, but it was what it was. I had no disillusions about her lifestyle at the time. I knew where she worked was a seedy setup, and it was no surprise that she had trouble with amphetamines and the like. But there was something I liked about the girl. One time we met up for a drink in a fairly decent bar and conversation turned to family and such. She really casually mentioned that she had a daughter, which was a bit of a surprise. She didn't look old enough to even had kids. So I asked how old she was, what was she like, all that stuff. Then came the thing that got me. She just shrugged it off and told me that she hadn't seen her in years. Apparently she had been raped in her early teens, carried the pregnancy to full term without anyone knowing, and when she was born the kid was taken from her, practically at birth, by her mother, who by then had sole custody due to the drug problem she had at the time. I didn't want to push it too far, but it turned out she had never made any effort to see the kid, as she believed she was better off where she was. To be fair, she was probably right. Maybe not be as horrific as some of the stuff on this thread, but I distinctly remember the shock and sadness I felt at that moment. I have lipedema, which causes my arms and legs to be disproportionately large to the rest of my body. I was in Mexico with a tour group and had finally picked up the courage to take off my beach cover up and get into the ocean to snorkel. It was fantastic, and I felt alive and so happy. I got out of the water and sat on a lounger, and immediately an older woman from the group came to visit. She talked about how it was her and her husband's first vacation, as for 35 years they couldn't go anywhere but to church events and shopping, and stayed close to the phone. Then she told me about the garden, their friends and lifestyle, and went on and on. I was ready to get back in the water when she started to tell me about her son, who was a troubled kid. This went on for an hour. How bad he was, all his criminal charges, how the last time they saw him, he wouldn't drop in, but they talked on the street. A week later he was murdered in jail at the age of 34. Several gangs were out to kill him and eventually did. I felt terrible. Then in a super cheerful voice she asked why my body was so big, and it became clear that she thought if she shared her pain with me I should reciprocate. The whole thing felt slimy and manipulative. Years ago I worked in a dementia facility with a girl in her 20s. My son was only 5 or so at the time, and we talked about him often. She always said she couldn't wait to have kids. So then Mother's Day arrives, and she spends the whole day crying. Finally she tells me she had already had a baby but he died. She claims she had the baby at home, and he'd only lived a few hours. She went to a local hospital, but none of the people there really spoke English in California, and didn't realize she'd just given birth. She did not take the baby to the hospital because she was convinced that they would take him away. So she tells the baby's dad, in Washington, that she'd had him but he died. He tells her to bring the baby and fly home. She has to save money for a month or two. In that time she supposedly has her dead son in a box in the closet. Finally she has the money, so she goes home. She claims to have flown from California to Washington with the baby in a box, in her bagger's carry-on. This was post 9/11. No faking way. The X-ray machine scanned the baby in a bag and said nothing. They then take said box to a park in town and buried it. Claims to have never opened the box for baby daddy to see, because it was too upsetting for her. A few months later they get married. Our son's death turned out to be a good thing, because it brought us back together. I've always wondered what was actually in the box they buried. That dumb bastard thinks his firstborn son is in some unmarked grave in a park. But hey, it was a good thing. A while back I worked in a small town liquor store. The place has one traffic light and that everybody knows everybody's stereotypical feel, so you know where I'm coming from. So this dude shows up from out of town. I'll call him Ron. Turns out this guy just moved from out of state, and he quickly becomes a regular at the store. Ron would show up every Friday or Saturday, shoot the sheet for a few minutes, and buy a pint of whiskey before heading home. One night Ron shows up, and he's visibly distraught as well as drunk. And he starts going on about bad stuff that he's done, just things he regretted, women that he cheated on, and felt bad about, etc. But then his story takes a dark turn. He actually confesses, to me and another lady working there, about murdering a dude back in his home state. This man was one of his friends as well as his sister's boyfriend. He went into detail about how he duped this guy into riding off with him to a secluded state park where they got drunk together, and then under the ruse of going to the cooler to get some more beer, he just shot the dude in the back and left him there to die. The reason behind it is that he was mad at this guy for beating up on his sister. At first, I was pretty certain this dude was just bullshitting us until he started to break down and cry. And we are talking red-faced, snot running, guilty as hell bawling. Me and the lady just looked at each other, like what the fuck? I don't remember exactly what we said to get him out of there, but she called the cops on him after he left. I kinda put two and two together, this dude just showing up out of nowhere in this armpit town, where nobody wants to be. It just makes too much sense that this dude was on the run from something. And thankfully, that was the last time I saw Ron. I'm not sure if he ever came back to the store, cause after that summer I left and started college full time. If you ever want to meet strange people with crazy stories, work at a liquor store. Back in the early 2000s I worked at a grocery store chain and the assistant manager was a real ballbuster who delighted in being a hard ass for no real reason. On top of being a real asshole, you could tell when you talked to him that he just wasn't all that tightly wired. I learned from some other people that knew him that he was a sniper in the Gulf War. I asked him about his service one day, nothing deeply personal mind you, just trying to get the guy to warm up a little. He got the weirdest smile on his face and casually told me about how he used to shoot people all the time over there. That he and his guys would just go out and murder anyone that they saw, and that it didn't matter if they were civilians or not, because no one even counted their ammunition when they got back. I was hoping he was just talking shit to try to scare me, but then he opened up his wallet and took 2 pictures out of it that this guy carried around. The first picture was him, and I think 4 guys from his unit posing with a cab driver beside the cab. He told me that this guy had given them rides around the city all day. The second picture was them posing over his dead body with his head blown open like you would see hunters posing over an animal, and he is gleefully laughing about how right after that first photo was taken, he blew the guy's head apart with his sidearm and the guy never saw it coming. His entire unit is grinning over this dead body. He said that they did that kind of shit all the time over there, and he missed it, and wished he could do it here. I was at a college party where there was a lot of sorority girls because my best friend was in one. Anyways, I had gotten familiar with a lot of them, and that night I was in the kitchen getting myself a drink when one of the girls, let's call her Becky, came in to get another drink for herself. Becky was absolutely wasted, like coherent, and was able to walk but wasted. We chit chat for maybe 30 seconds when she turns, looks me dead in the eyes and says, "I'm going to kill myself tonight and nobody knows." And then starts laughing, and I was shocked to say the least. I asked her if she was okay and if she wanted me to get some help, but she just super rarely smiled and said, "No, I'm gonna be dead soon." I left and ran to my best friend and asked her who is that girl's closest friend so I could tell her what happened. Her friends end up taking her home, and shortly afterwards I ended up seeing her a couple more times before the end of the year, and she never mentioned it. Don't know if she didn't remember or it hurt too much to say anything. She's the fourth person to tell me that they were going to commit suicide, and the fourth person that I may have helped. I don't know if she really was going to do it or if that was just her cry for help. It's incredibly sad, and I really hope anyone out there that's suffering has someone to turn to before it's too late. There used to be this dude my fiance and I would hang out with. He was pretty cool at first, then he got really hardcore on Suboxone and would just come by our house and take naps. He lived an hour or so away, so he'd get a ride to our town to come by his sheet and then hang out at our house until he could catch a ride back home. We sort of got into it one day when we told him we didn't feel comfortable with him staying at our house when we weren't there. So we didn't see him for a couple months after that. Then we run into him at the store and start talking, and he nonchalantly tells us he might be going to prison. Why? Apparently he and his friend claimed to have robbed someone, a dealer I think he said, for $250k, and went and hid it somewhere. He said there was an investigation going on, but didn't give us any more details. He didn't seem worried about it. He was laughing and everything. Possibly unrelated side note, about a year after that, one of our hooked on meth relatives claims to have found $250k in an abandoned house. We don't know how she got it really, but she did come into an absurd amount of money with no real income or job to speak of. I'm talking 5+ new cars, 2 RVs, and a lot of other stuff. I always wonder if that was related to the first guy's money, but I'll never know. Cops knew about all of this, by the way. Well then, it's about time I get this off my chest, I guess. I was at friend's house once, and a notorious big bully of the city followed me in during the most psychotic period of his life, and sat me down on the sofa, and would casually turn his head and stare at me, literally just his head, to try and terrorize me. And after about 4 or 5's time of him doing it, I said to him, "Look, I'm sorry if I've done you wrong, mate, blah blah blah," and he quietly responded calmly to me that you're going to die with absolute intent. My mate is twice his size and was scared of him and stayed in the kitchen the whole time until he heard that and came out to defend me by pretending to get angry and take it personal by saying something like, "You faking threatening my family, are ya?" And the psycho bully just casually responded, "No, I don't want you to die," and then did the whole thing where he turns his head back to me again, and I must have went white at that moment or something, because I was ushered out of the flat whilst my mate kept him there, so he wouldn't follow me. About an hour after it all, I went to one of his neighbors who was my best friend. We all live on the same street, and saw them both standing at the door, and asked if they were okay, and they both casually acted like absolutely nothing had happened, which triggered me into extreme paranoia. Turns out he butchered himself in that flat that same night. I still remember filling a carrier bag up with flesh, cleaning it all up. The blood stains were literally imprinted in my vision. No matter how much we painted, bleached, sanded, repainted, the image was forever stained in our minds. He wanted to hurt me so badly, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. So he turned against himself and convinced himself he had demons inside him he needed to cut out for my safety. He survived and broke out of one of the more notorious mental institutes in the U.K. and came straight to my house acting like nothing had happened. I went to a mate's house with a bunch of my boys, and he was there. He picked up a small guitar banjo thing and started casually singing a song about how he was going to crucify me in a nearby fields. My boys weren't too happy about that, to say the least. He's in a coma right now suffering from COVID-19, which actually makes me really sad, to be honest. I remember the day his dad died. Me and his brother got into a fight in school and we were best friends. The loss of their father hit them so hard, and then he survives being possessed by a demon to having a child and getting his life back on track to then falling victim to the faking goddamn coronavirus. Breaks my heart thinking about him. I truly wish him the very best, but those moments of casual terror are certainly one of the most unique and horrific encounters I've had. Before this whole quarantine thing happened, I was in an airport in Vietnam. The COVID case count in the US at the time was 3,000. Ironically, people were telling me not to travel because of the danger of catching it, when in reality, I ended up getting detained in Vietnam for being American. They held us in a room in the airport with 6 other strangers, and I saw people come and go as they could only leave with the airline that brought them. I waited for 2 days. Some waited for hours. Some waited for a week. I met 2 gentlemen there. One, a 23-year-old millionaire entrepreneur, and a 56-year-old traveler who enjoys visiting Asian countries, so he can fuck young Asian women. In short, a womanizer. I thought it was cool that the situation brought us together, because we wouldn't have ever shared a conversation had we not been put in that situation. On my second day there, a Ukrainian guy arrives. Me and the other 2 gentlemen are sharing a beer which we bought from the airport convenience store. When the Ukrainian enters, we offer him a beer and ask him what brings him to the country. He says nonchalantly, "Well, a year ago, I tried to kill myself." Everybody's eyes widened. Nobody knew how to react. He continues to tell us the story of his depression and how he now makes a living traveling, spending time in nature, and blogging about his positive feelings to his some 600 followers on the internet. It was then that realized that you don't have to live a conventional 9-to-5 job. Pretty much every story my mother tells me, she is a world-class Debbie Downer, and she is totally into true crime shows. So whenever she starts telling you a story she heard of from TV, you know that it will end with someone getting raped and murdered, no matter how happy the story starts. You sit at the dinner table and talk about fluffy kittens. She has a story of a woman who got tied up in her basement and dismembered while being kept alive for days, and she thinks the story is appropriate because it was the victim's cat that identified the killer. That's her excuse for both watching these shows and telling us the stories. But they got caught. But she never needed that kind of TV show. Apparently our family is faked up enough. I will never forget that family dinner with one of her cousins, where they casually talked and remember the good times. Tone about how one of my uncles came home drunk, fell downstairs and died, followed by the story of how he was an abusive husband and everybody in the family knew that his wife gave him a gentle nudge as soon as he arrived upstairs. And that wasn't even the worst story that day. As much as my mother wins through the sheer amount of casually told horrifying stories, the aforementioned cousin takes the all-time crown with the impossible to top. My neighbor had an infection in his guts, but refused to go to the doctor. He just ignored the pain and didn't allow his wife to call the doctor, although the pain was unbearable. When he finally fainted, he died in the ambulance. As they cut him open for the autopsy, the infection was so bad that they ordered to cremate his body right away. All told again in a light-hearted oh yeah, funny story tone on the way to our car. This one is a combination of horrifying and hilarious, but here it goes. I parked in the parking lot outside my apartment and was gathering my stuff out of the backseat to head into my apartment building. To set the scene, this was in the middle of a bright sunny day. There were birds chirping and it was beautiful weather. A neighbor from the other building was out at his car, so I said hello because I wanted to be a nice neighbor. He returned my greeting and struck up a conversation. Before I know it, he tells me he's seen my girlfriend and I around, and I'm a very lucky man as she is a beautiful woman. At this point I'm thinking, this is mildly uncomfortable, but he's just trying to say something nice. This is where it takes an interesting turn. The guy launches into a half statement, half question to the effect of the sex must be out of this world. He tells me I should spend all of my time having sex with my girlfriend. Now I feel weird and am looking for a way to pivot out of the conversation and into the safety of my apartment so I can spend the next couple hours debating ever leaving it again. That's when it happened. While reaching into his car, which we had somehow moved towards during our conversation, he says, "Man, you gotta get yourself one of these." At which point he pulls from the driver's side door compartment, I shit you not, the biggest cork ring that I have ever seen. He tells me how it helps him last for hours and how hard he stays while he's wearing it. Meanwhile, I'm wondering why the hell it's in the side door compartment of his car. When was the last time he used it? Has he cleaned it? Is he trying to get me to hold? Is it socially acceptable to run away while he's in the middle of a sentence? Shortly thereafter I was able to extricate myself from the proceedings and flee to the safety of my apartment. I spent the night looking for new rentals. TLDR, dude showed me his magnum-sized cork ring for his magnum dong in the middle of a beautiful suburban parking lot. During my senior year of college, I met up with a friend who I hadn't seen in about a year or two for lunch. We were updating each other on our lives and graduation/career aspirations, and then she told me she wanted to tell me a secret, but asked for me not to judge her. I said sure whatever, couldn't be that bad. She proceeded to tell me about how she worked her way up from being a teller at the regional bank by faking her district manager twice her age. She's 22, he's 50 something. But it gets worse. She said she now works in the regional office with him, and they have secret sex in his office and random places in the building after hours. She said her favorite part about faking in his office was when he bends her over his desk and she gets to look at the pictures of his family on his desk. She gets off by being the other woman, and I quote, "comes like 10 times every time. It's the best sex of my life." His wife comes into work sometimes, and she's actually befriended her. The guy's kids are the same age as my friend. Shame on the guy for infidelity, but shame on my friend for loving being the other woman. TLDR, 22 years, F, friend fax boss, 50 plus YRS, M, to get promotions and loves being the other woman. Sophomore year of college, my roommate, myself, and one of my roommate's friends, RF, were hanging out in the dorm of my roommate's crush, just talking. I think it was the first time RF and I were meeting roommate's crush. RF was an imbalanced character, kind of a barnacle, but roommate liked him. But RF did not like me. As an aside, roommate and I grew up together. We'd been tight for 15 years. Not a new friend. As I said, RF had issues. He told roommate and another HS classmate of mine that he was going to pick up a knife and stab me when he saw me next. They asked why. I just don't like him. Spoiler, he never did. But we all believed he could. Anyway, the four of us were sitting around, getting to know her and her us, and RF asked, "Oh, do you know? Roommate's crush." "Yeah." She's a ref, cuts her off, states blankly, "Yeah, I killed her grandpa." Roommate's crush. The air falls out of the room. Horrified silence. Then myself and roommate burst out laughing. RF and roommate's crush sat staring at us. Only one of them also looked horrified. It was just the way he said it, and the crazy awkwardness. I don't think we knew what else to do. Roommate's crush didn't laugh. I don't think roommate got very far with her. Just to be clear, after the highly inappropriate laughter someone asked, "What the fuck are you talking about, RF?" RF explained he hit him with his car, or hit his car with him in it, I don't remember, in an accident. No foul play, no drugs, no alcohol, just an unfortunate accident years ago that wasn't his fault. So the fact of the matter was he did kill her grandpa, which is tragic. It was the way he delivered it, the blithe words he used, and my knowing he was a bit psycho, that made it horrifying. I left a career job a few years back without really having a backup plan, and ended up working at a Goodwill to make rent. Not the worst job ever, but Goodwill has a company policy to prioritize hiring first-time workers, handicapped folks, people with records, etc. It was a really interesting cast of characters. I heard new sideways shit every day, but two things stand out to me. One was a young girl who told me she and her family were here illegally, and that he lived in constant fear of being deported. It was very surreal, because she talked about it so normally and basically said that she was so sick of being scared that she just needed to talk about it. The other was a different girl who was like 17 and Goodwill had been her first job. While we were closing up I asked her how school was going, and she responded with so much better now that I'm out of the house. She went on to tell me that her and her boyfriend Greg had been living at her parents' selling weed to get by. Apparently Greg has gotten her pregnant and forced her to have an abortion. Her father was pissed. She then mentioned that Greg tried to fight her dad, lost, and then they faked in her parents' bed as payback. TW. Sexual abuse. Also sorry this is on mobile. There was a girl I met at an apartment complex pool and we became friends. Let's call her A. She didn't have many friends and she seemed nice, so we hung out casually for about 3 months, until she told me this story, which caused me to ghost her. Some background about her. Her relationship with her ex was weird. 1. They still lived together, and 2. They still slept in the same bed. They bought a dog before the split happened, and she used missing the dog to move back in with him. Now this is just the build up. Eventually the ex found someone he was interested in and starting dating this new girl. Let's call her B. Well, B didn't know that when she wasn't around, A was still sleeping with the ex. Everything B told this ex was relayed back to A during their cuddle sessions. A decided she wanted B out of the picture, so she decides to take a really private confidential piece of information the ex had told her to remove B. When B was a child, she had been sexually abused, specifically anally, by some male family member. A posted B's phone number on eBay, saying she was open for anal sex. Yep. And A told me this story, telling me how B had obviously been incredibly triggered by all the phone calls from men looking for anal, and come to the apartment of the ex crying and looking for help. The ex helped her change her phone number, but had no idea how it had happened. Overall A and the ex were really horrible human beings, and I ghosted them. I think about B pretty often, and hope she's okay and found a less shitty boyfriend. I was once in rehab in my 30s in another city I wasn't familiar with. I was in there with a much older lady, let's call her Linda, who was from that city herself, and was a really bad alcoholic. We were in an inpatient place that would allow us supervised visits to this shopping complex that included a Walmart once a week to get personal items and cigarettes, etc. I didn't know Linda well, my first corporal weeks there, but I knew she'd had a lot of personal trauma and circumstances, but so did many of these women. They all had horrific stories once you take time to sit and listen. However, as I said, I was new. So the dorm mother, as we called her, drops us off at the front and tells us to meet her back in same place in 30 minutes. It was just me and Linda. As we get out, I mentioned I'd never been in this Walmart before and wasn't sure where the Tampanal was, but that I knew pretty much all Walmarts were the same. She casually goes, "Oh, I'll show you where to go, I'm from here. I've been in this one 1,000 times." About a year after it was built and in business, my 9-year-old daughter got abducted from here and was never found. My daughters were 7 and 9 then, and I almost faking died. I was literally a faking mess and barely managed to get through a faking 15-minute errand in a Walmart with her. Like, how do you stand to be here? How you stand to breathe? I later asked my dorm mother in private if it was even true. It was, in fact, and had happened almost 15 years before, and the little girl was never found. That still bothers me. My ex-coworker once told me about the time he caught a murderer. He and I worked at a retail store and we were mopping the floor and closing up. For the sake of the story, I'm calling him Steve. There are 2 other guys, Ralph and Kyle. While we are closing up, Steve tells me this story about when he was back in California. He used to have a weed dealer, Kyle, and on his way to get his weed, Steve heard from a cop that Kyle had been murdered. I don't remember the exact which way, but Ralph had murdered Kyle in an armed mugging attempt or something. All Ralph got out of it was $10 worth of weed that was meant for Steve. Steve didn't give a shit about the weed at this point. He was just pissed off because Kyle was his friend and Kyle had just been murdered for $10 worth of weed. Ralph got away, though. The police searched for him, but Steve knew for sure that it was Ralph, and he knew where Ralph was going. Perhaps based on a past conflict or some other beef Ralph had with Kyle that gave a clear motive and no alibi. I don't remember. This is where the story gets a little more unbelievable sounding. Steve hacked into the Border Patrol security cameras and set up a facial recognition program to find Ralph trying to escape across the border. He actually finds Ralph. He calls the authorities while watching Ralph try to make his way through the border. He explains the situation to the border patrol agents, who catch Ralph. Ralph gets prison for life, or whatever. The only reason I believed this story was because Steve goes to the same college I do, a tech-oriented college. I don't know how good the cybersecurity is on the border patrol security camera system, but clearly not good enough, if this is true. Anyway, Steve was elated. He had just caught his friend's murderer and got him thrown in prison. And because the evidence needed to be usable in court, they had to reveal the source, aka Steve, who I testified over the phone. Ralph knew Steve, and Steve was telling me this because just a week before he told me the story, or sometime near that, Ralph had finally gotten phone privileges and his first call was Steve to cuss him out for catching him. It sounded like a lot of BS at the time, but because of Steve's history and my high hope that it was real, I like to believe it, even if just for my own amusement. Steve, if you're reading this and you recognize this story, please tell it Betel Mayo, because I don't do it any justice. On a first date with an otherwise lovely, articulate, and charming woman, she casually mentions over dinner I was molested by both my dad and my uncle. Neither one knew what the other was doing. Don't get me wrong, I don't fault her for that. She is clearly the victim and needed help. That's not the issue. The issue is what happened afterward. I said I'm so sorry that happened to you. Nobody deserves that. You didn't deserve that. I'm flattered that you feel comfortable telling me. May I ask, how do you come to terms with something like that? How do you cope? Therapy. Her response, oh, I don't need therapy. I'm fine. That seemed to open the floodgates. From that point on, the conversation, dominated almost exclusively by her, descended into a litany of reasons that men are essentially the scourge of the planet and the worst things to ever exist. I tried to be a gentleman and sat and listened and nodded and saw the evening to a peaceful yet hasty close. As I bade her good night, I said, I've gotta ask, you seem to have a fair amount of, well, justified animosity toward men. And I understand that given what you've been through. But, then why are you dating? Her brusque, somewhat demanding response, well, how else am I going to find a man and be happy? I don't know about super casually, but my dad was in Vietnam and suffered from PTSD the rest of his life as a result. He was an alcoholic and a heroin addict, although you would have never known it from talking to him. My mom had custody growing up, and my dad had visitation that he would sometimes take advantage of, but my mom did everything in her power to limit his visitation. She had her issues as well, and every time they interacted they battled. They pitted me against each other all throughout my life by telling me that the other one was a drug addict. My dad was the fun dad, and he was a very funny guy, so I tended to side with him. I idolized him. I eventually moved in with him when I was about 16 because my mom and I had a rough relationship. After moving in with him, I got to see the dark side of his existence. He would drink all day, a bottle of vodka or equivalent in Bush Tall Boys. Sometimes he would fall asleep in his chair with a beer in his hand that would eventually tip into his lap. He was obviously struggling with his existence. Well, one day he stops me when I'm heading upstairs and abruptly tells me he's going to kill himself. I, of course, beg him not to. He proceeds to tell me a story about Vietnam that haunted him. He was out on the town partying, and a prostitute walked up and stole his hat. He chased her through the streets yelling for her to give it back. He chased her all the way into some sort of room and kept telling her to give his hat back, getting more and more upset. She told him to fuck her for X amount of money and she'd give it back. Sounds like she was being somewhat playful about it. He got to the point where he was irate, pulled out his gun, and shot her in the face. My dad was drafted and was a total anti-war hippie prior to going over there. He went to paratrooping school and some sort of advanced paratrooping school in order to delay being deployed, hoping the war would be over before they could send him there. That obviously didn't happen, and so he was stuck in a paratrooping unit dropping right into war zones. It's depressing how many lives were ruined for that pointless war. He was an intelligent, funny, extremely caring man, and I wonder what he could have been had he not been drafted. I asked an older guy, I worked with, who I knew everyone kind of avoided because he has a habit of talking non-stop. I figured no one talks with him and he probably just wants to feel human. I get a moment to work near him for 15 minutes or so and figure I'm just going to have a nonchalant work convo. He's visibly happy to be talking to me. Makes me feel good, but I'm also really want to hear what he has to talk about. I'm just going to write it out as I remember it. He goes on about how he lives with his girlfriend slash best friend slash someone who provides him a place to stay. He loves dogs. He's been upset lately because his girlfriend's boss is essentially pimping her out to his business friends. And apparently this happened last year, but she needed the money, so she went with it. The home situation is girlfriend, 4 children of which claims, but knows he's not the father. Girlfriend's official boyfriend, who is another man about their age. He starts to get upset because he remembers that she met a man online, a third boyfriend that's supposed to be coming down to move into this 4-bedroom house. There is a 16-year-old living there who just went missing with her boyfriend. Through listening to him talk for about 40 minutes throughout the day, I was horrified that he was unaware just how unhealthy and faked up this whole living situation is for everyone involved. I also didn't know why I was privy to all this information after a "Hey, how's it going, He has so much to say. I felt he made up out of love that others have for him, just so he had something to hold on to in terms of human connection. I kept getting the feeling he knew they didn't want him there. Those children will fight an uphill battle understanding healthy relationships. The girlfriend probably has a lifetime of abuse to numb out from. I don't know what kind of grown man is attracted to that living situation, but my gut doesn't feel right. I guess the most horrifying thing to me is knowing that there must be so much pain, loneliness and different forms of abuse between members of this crowded house. I hope you're around and well, I hope you made it to a place where you can talk to people and work out your thoughts, man. Late to the post, so this will probably get buried, but people need to hear this. I was at a party, and as it was winding down I ended up having a conversation with this random guy who I had just met that night. We were exchanging crazy stories from our past. After telling him about what I thought at the time was a pretty crazy incident involving burning a friend's car, he told me the following story in the most casual way possible. The following remarks are as told to me by the stranger as best as I can remember from his perspective years ago. When I was really hooked on meth, I used to always go to this country bar the next town over. They always had some hot as beaches there. Man, me and these girls used to get faked up all the time there. It was great, but they would never fact, man. Faking beaches. Then one night this hoe came in, like a real hoe, not a stupid slut. She said for $100 I could do whatever, so we hop in my truck and go for a ride. I knew this old dirt road that was close and took her there. We faked around for a bit and then that beach said she was done, but I was still hard as fuck, so fuck that sheet. I pulled out my knife and said, "You're not done yet." Man, you should've seen the look on that beach's face. Ha ha ha, dumb hoe. When I finished I just kicked that beach out the truck and drove off. Ha ha ha. I'm just staring, mouth agape in absolute shock and horror of what this dude just faking drunkenly bragged about. But he wasn't quite done. Crazy sheet, huh? After that night, man, I realized I could just do that sheet any faking time to those dumb as hoe, man. There was always stupid hoe at those random as bars and no one was gonna believe them, so fuck it. I had free bussy for that entire summer anytime I wanted it. I only had to cut a few of them. I'm clean now though. I was in complete and utter shock and immediately started going off calling him a faking rapist. He got pissed, called me a bussy, hopped in his car, and drove off. I asked the girl who threw the party the next morning who in the hell that guy was, and she had no clue, just some random friend of a friend of a friend that randomly found out about the party. This was about 15 years ago. TLDR, random drunk dude at the end of a party openly admitted that he picked up a prostitute at a bar and then raped her and threatened her with a knife. He found it so easy that he continued to do this over the summer to other prostitutes and only had to cut them sometimes. This one's a doozy. I met some girl through social media. We will call her Stacy. We talked for about a month before she decided to ask me to meet in person. Stacy was how the kids say a big titty goth girl. So not being in a relationship in 8 months, I was eager to have someone be so interested in me. She asked to meet up at a bar. Not much of a drinker personally, but of course I obliged. We met and the bar was extremely loud. Stacy then proposed the liquor store and then to her place, since it was blocks away. We did exactly that. We arrive, go up the world's oldest elevator and into her apartment. The night proceeds exactly as you'd imagine. Talking, drinking, flirting, and finally the deed. Except on the way into her bedroom I catch a glimpse of a pagan ritual table. Before my brain can tell me to escape, she is tearing clothes off of me. Yes, the sex was exactly as kinky as you'd imagine. Leash collar, defamation, slapping, etc. But most prevalent daddy issues. After everything is said and done, we are laying in bed, and she rolls over, looks me dead in the eyes, and begins to tell me about her father. He was abusive mentally, physically, etc. To which I apologize for saying no one deserves that. She then tells me she agrees and that's why she got into rituals and dark arts. Then without missing a beat she says I used all this stuff to wish my dad would die. And he did. My blood ran cold as this woman told me all this while I'm naked in her bed. I soon excuse myself to the restroom, which I previously noted had a fire escape out of the window there, and I was gone. I was dating this girl for a few months. It got serious to the point she wanted me to meet her family. I'm super excited but nervous AF. She plans it. We spend the day together and then end it with dinner at her place. Probably a good time to mention that this was a teenage relationship. I was 18. She was 16 when this was happening. I'm 23 now. We get to her place and she then dropped the bomb on me that her dad is racist and she didn't tell him I was black. Like bruh, that's some shit you tell me when planning, not when we pull up. My heart sunk and she just seemed so nonchalant about it. Turns out she planned it when he wouldn't be home. It was still kinda scary because I'd be meeting her mom, who married her racist dad, and younger sisters, raised by her racist dad. I was so shook that none of them treated me poorly in any way. Her little sisters loved me and wouldn't leave me alone. And the mom was so freaking nice. She told me how Rachel had been talking about me all day and that they cooked together. Rachel brought me my food, and I swear to this day I cherish that moment. I felt so taken care of. We dated for months after, and I'd always ask if her mom secretly hates me or something, and she'd say no. I obviously could only take that at face value. Ended up breaking up due to moving and distance. The following story uses X instead of specific names and dates to avoid confidentiality conflicts, though this is related to a nationally known event. People tell me bizarre stuff all the time because I'm a physician. I'm used to horrible stories being shared casually, but the one that shocked me the most occurred when I was still a medical student. At the time I was doing mostly solo appointments. I'd see the patient first, then check out to my attendings, at which point we'd go in together, and I was rotating at an off-campus private clinic. A middle-aged woman arrived for a general check-in. My attending suddenly said, "You can come in, but let me handle this one." I thought, that's odd, but there's clearly a reason. She was a lovely woman, average in build and money for the area, slightly overweight, Caucasian, and financially secure, enough to have regular hair appointments, good health insurance, and quality clothes. She was warm and friendly, she chatted with me freely, and asked about my education. She seemed so normal, a nice 50-something-year-old suburban mom from the Midwest. I liked her. I happened to mention my high school X as we discussed my education, because she asked if I'd always lived in the area. When I said X, a grimace of pain dashed across her face. It quickly disappeared, only to be replaced by a robotic emotionlessness I'd never before encountered during human interaction. She said, "You graduated what year?" I told her and she said, "I'm glad it wasn't 20XX, when my son killed X." My mouth dropped open before I had the courtesy to control myself. I just spent 30 minutes casually chatting with the mother of the man who killed X, a girl who went to my high school. After she left, my attending shared a few of her personal struggles. I confess, I had difficulty matching the sociable woman I had just met with the tragic person he described after. X's murder happened a mere 7 years after my own HS graduation. It was a national story that fascinated people because the associated kidnapping was so fast and so visible. The emotional impact on my local community was massive. Even today, I often see cars sporting bumper stickers with X's name on them. It was an affluent county, and, while most of us may not admit it, we tended to think such things just didn't happen round here. Not only was it a horrible and tragic murder, it gave everyone a creepy chill, because it happened at a popular location visited by most residents. It'd be an understatement to say our collective cognitive dissonance was harshly challenged by X's death. I realize it's probably not hard to figure out who X was, but I will not confirm details or answer questions out of patient courtesy. All I will say is that I feel great sorrow and compassion for everyone affected, including the murderer's mother. The lesson I learned: even happy-looking, well-off people can harbor tremendous sorrows. One should never assume another person's life is easy. My career subsequently taught me that grief is the price of loving, and pain is the price of living. No one escapes payment. I have several, but I'll remark on the ones I can remember. I worked in customer service a few years ago, and we got some strange ones. A lot of people are willing to share very intimate details of their lives with me for some reason, not just customers, but coworkers, classmates, etc. My guess is that it's because I'm genuinely interested in most topics and try not to judge. I don't know. Anyway, there was a guy who was talking to me while I had his order in the machine. It takes a while to make it, and he started telling me how his hobby was going into the woods alone and studying bears. He liked to get really close to them, and he showed me several videos of him getting very close to wild bears, including a mother with cubs, less than 15 feet from them, by my estimate. I also had a coworker tell me in detail about how his mother was slowly dying, and he was going to have to take the next day off to pull the plug, and then ranting about how his ex-wife was trying to involve herself in the will to get the mother's money. A different coworker tell me about how she used to be homeless when she was a teenager, and then through much of her adult life, before explaining about how she frequently cheated on her ex-husband, and going into very explicit detail about her sex life. Two different college friends explained about being abused, although I question one of them a bit. She was proven to lie about other major things, and generally tried to manipulate people, but if it actually happened to her, it might explain a lot, and it's a horrible thing. I've also had a concerning amount of people over the course of my life tell me about their first times doing various NSFW things, and one random dude at an ice cream shop once told me how he first started using meth. A friend of mine in college was an admissions host. They'd show prospective students around the school and were given a double room to allow prospective students from far away to spend the night. He'd often try to bring these kids around us at the end of the day so they can see what an average day at the university was like. Since the admissions host spends the whole day with the high schooler, he was always able to give us a small scouting report on the kid before we all hung out that night. Well, on this particular day, we got the scoop: this kid is weird. There had been a couple of different students before, and we'd always just try to do our best and make them feel more comfortable around college students, which is sometimes why they'd be acting so weird. As an icebreaker, we always asked each student to tell us 3 things about them that our friend, the admissions host, wouldn't know. Typically, the answers would range from being a 2-sport athlete in high school to telling us that they like to surf in their free time. So we finally meet the guy, and yes, he was pretty weird, more so than the others but nothing crazy, until we asked him to tell us 3 things about himself. Without missing a beat, with the straightest face, and without even a glimmer of sarcasm, he started off with, "Sometimes, I like to get naked and cuddle with my dog." The hangout ended soon after that. We did not ask him to name 2 other facts. I didn't see him at the school next year, so our admissions team may have dodged a bullet there. At lunch my sophomore year of high school, a new girl sat at our table. We were idly talking about random stuff. It's not really important. Someone mentions the Youtube player and his tour, or whatever he was doing. I don't watch his stuff, sorry. The girl goes back, quote, "That guy saved me from killing myself." At first we were all like, yeah, high schoolers talking about suicide for sheets and giggles, the usual. Someone asks her to elaborate. She very plainly said back quote, "I was raped. I was gonna kill myself, but that YouTuber saved me." I'm not one to doubt that sort of thing. I myself was sexually assaulted. But the way she was so quick to tell people she just met about it put me off a little. It takes people different amounts of time to cope with trauma. I couldn't talk about or even remember what happened to me until I was 14. Maybe she was already past that journey of recovery, who knows. It just seemed very out of place. We all were pretty quiet for a while afterwards. Sorry for the novel, I'm on mobile. TLDR, girl we'd known for all of 10 minutes told us she'd been raped and was suicidal. A bit sudden. Warning, sexual assault. He said 2 terrible things. Went to a bar with a friend and we started chatting. Dude casually mentioned that he hired a prostitute in Africa, where he was a really rich person, when he was in his late teens, before 19. Just to see what it was like, lol. I spaced out. He mentioned how uncomfortable she was and how she completely ignored him while he was her, and then at some point without looking she asked, "Are you done?" He told her yes, and then with a little giggle he added, "Even though I wasn't, but okay." His whole attitude was the same, as if he was talking about stealing snacks or smoking weed as a kid. Smiles and giggles. He truly didn't realize how much easier life is for him compared to her. Note, nothing against sex workers. I have close friends who were/are sex workers. Whether you do it because you have to or by choice, you're still a human being, and my disgust is targeted at him for not seeing/treating her like a fellow human. I confronted him. I told him I'm shocked and disgusted, and that since he opened this Pandora's box, he might as well get everything out. He told me his ex-girlfriend was sexually harassed in college by a professor, and when she complained the school took the predator's side. She came home that day and told him everything. He semi-listened, then he insisted on having sex. She was not in the mood, obviously, but he kept pushing and undressing her while she repeatedly asked him to stop. Then she gave up. He ended up raping her. He said he feels guilt, shame and regret. I told him to eat a dick. Ladies, both the ladies mentioned and ladies who have gone through something like this, you deserve none of this shit, and what you do deserve is peacefulness of mind, body and soul. I wish you a healthy recovery. I don't know what else to say. I won't disclose who this person is to me, but one night they drove a girl from work home who was a little bit drunk. She drunkenly roped him into her bed to sleep for the night and they ended up faking. She woke up the next morning and started crying and telling him to leave her house. When he told me this, I wanted to crawl into a hole and die. Not to sound like a neckbeard white knight, but I have dealt with 2 drunk girls in my entire life who got grabby for my ass and tried to make the best advance that a drunk girl could possibly make, but I dragged their ass into a bed with a blanket and garbage bin, etc. But this guy, what the fuck? I get that she was pulling him in and whatnot, but like, dude. Edit. I'm well aware that he might have been lying, but this is a guy who could not lie to save his life, but who really, truly, knows in the end.